I thank the representative of Egypt for his statement. I now give floor to the representative of China.
主席先生。
Mr. President, China would like to thank Secretary General Guterres for his briefing. China firmly opposes the development by the DPRK of its nuclear and missile programs in violation of the Security Council resolutions and urges the DPRK to abide by the relevant resolutions of the Security Council. Since the beginning of this year, the situation on the Korean Peninsula has been one of constant tension, while the DPRK continued to conduct nuclear tests and missile launching in defiance of the universal opposition by the international community. The parties concerned kept expanding military exercises and scaling up show of force. Escalation of tension on the Korean Peninsula to the point of risking spiraling out of control is not in any party's interest. Mr. President, the nuclear issue of the Korean Peninsula has lasted for over 2 decades with deep historical causes and grave and complex current context. Reviewing the evolution of the nuclear issue of the Korean Peninsula, we can see that when the parties concerned moved towards each other and respected each other's concerns, it was possible to achieve results, whereas when the parties took tough stances and disregarded the security of the other side, it would lead to the deterioration of the situation. The current situation on the Korean Peninsula is mired in a vicious circle of tough posturing and confrontation, which hardly makes one optimistic about its future. However, the hope for peace is not totally obliterated. There is still a possibility for negotiation, and the option of use of force is unacceptable. China believes that all parties concerned should keep in mind the big picture of maintaining peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula, judge the situation calmly, make wise choices, and take practical actions. First, it is necessary to put an immediate end to rhetoric and actions that are unfavorable to denuclearization as well as peace and security of the Korean Peninsula and ease the situation as soon as possible. The tough positions taken by the parties concerned can only escalate tension, deepen division, and increase mutual trust, and therefore are not helpful to the security of all parties. The parties concerned should keep calm and exercise restraint to prevent the situation on the Korean Peninsula from worsening and getting out of control, and create necessary conditions for turning the situation around. Secondly, it is necessary to act in accordance with the provisions and spirit of the Security Council resolutions on the DPRK and push for an appropriate settlement of the nuclear issue of the Korean Peninsula. Since last year, the Council has adopted unanimously a series of resolutions on the DPRK. These resolutions represent the common will of the international community and constitute international obligations that must be observed by all parties. All parties must implement the Council resolutions on the DPRK comprehensively and in their entirety, strengthen non-proliferation measures to curb the DPRK's nuclear and missile programs, and also actively push for a peaceful settlement through diplomatic and political means. At the same time, there is a need to avoid negative impact on the livelihood of the people of the DPRK and the humanitarian assistance activities in the country. Unilateral sanction measures without the authorization of the Security Council undermine the unity of the Council and hurt the legitimate rights and interests of other countries and should therefore be abandoned. Thirdly, it is necessary for all sides to shoulder their due responsibilities and fulfill their own obligations in earnest. The current situation on the peninsula is not caused by any one party alone, and it is not helpful to impose on any one party the responsibility of resolving the problem. The parties concerned should move towards each other instead of engaging in mutual blaming. Still less should they try to shift their responsibilities to others. The U.S. has committed to not seeking regime change, not pursuing the overthrow of the DPRK's government, not accelerating the reunification of the Korean Peninsula, and not moving its troops beyond the 38th parallel. We hope that the U.S. will turn these 4 commitments into concrete actions. Fourthly, it is necessary to remain committed to peaceful settlement and resume dialogue and negotiations as soon as possible. The core of the nuclear issue of the Korean Peninsula is security. So the fundamental solution lies in addressing in a balanced way the security concerns of all parties, including the DPRK. There is no military option when it comes to the settlement of the nuclear issue of the Korean Peninsula, and resort to force can only bring disastrous consequences to the peninsula. Sanctions are means, not the end. History shows that dialogue and negotiations are the fundamental way to ease tension and advance denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula. The parties concerned should endeavor to turn the pressure of sanctions into the driving force for the resumption of dialogue and negotiations, and pull the nuclear issue on the Korean Peninsula back to the right track of peaceful settlement through dialogue and negotiations at an early date. Mr. President, as a close neighbor of the Korean Peninsula, China has persisted in promoting denuclearization of the peninsula, maintaining peace and stability on the peninsula, and seeking a settlement through dialogue and negotiations. China is opposed to conflicts and chaos on the Korean Peninsula. China has always supported and implemented comprehensively and strictly the Security Council resolutions on the DPRK. In so doing, China has made greater efforts and paid a higher price than anyone else. It is irresponsible to doubt or challenge what China has done. In view of the current situation on the peninsula, China has put forward the suspension for suspension proposal, namely suspension by the DPRK of nuclear and missile activities and suspension by the U.S. and the ROK of large-scale military exercises. We have proposed the dual-track approach of promoting parallel progress in denuclearization and the establishment of a peace mechanism on the peninsula. The Russian Federation has also put forward the idea of a phased approach to the settlement of the issues of the Korean Peninsula. On the basis of the above proposals, China and the Russian Federation issued a joint statement on July 4th this year, proposing a roadmap for the settlement of the Korean Peninsula's problems. The joint proposals of China and Russia are practical and feasible and are aimed at promoting the peaceful settlement of the nuclear issue of the Korean Peninsula and maintaining peace and stability on the peninsula. As such, we hope they will elicit response and support from the parties concerned. Mr. President, due to historical reasons, the Korean Peninsula is still in the shadow of the Cold War. This is the root cause for the protraction and lack of settlement of the nuclear issue of the Korean Peninsula. The parties concerned need to reject Cold War thinking in all its forms, establish a concept of common, comprehensive, cooperative, and sustainable security, and seek a peaceful settlement of the Korean nuclear issue through political and diplomatic means, so as to realize at an early date denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and long-term security and tranquility of the Northeast Asia for the benefit of the people of the countries in the region. China stands ready to work together with the parties concerned and the international community to continue to play a positive and constructive role for the realization of this goal. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of China for his